Hello, I'm Lisa Smedman. I'm the creator of Lunacy, a game for the It's a Date salon for the Paper Cut Arcade. Lunacy is a game about a man who's under a magic compulsion. Every time a full moon comes around, he feels a bloodlust, a desire to kill, to consume his victims, and he's trying to put an end to this. The only way he can do that is under the light, the blood red light of a blood moon, a full moon that is undergoing a lunar eclipse. To do this, he chases around the world trying to be on the spot where a total lunar eclipse is happening, where the skies are clear, and he can bask in the light of the blood moon and undo this curse that has given him immortality, but an immortality at a terrible price. His best chances of undoing the curse are when there's a super blood moon. A super moon, a super full moon, happens when there's a full moon and the moon is at perigee, its closest point to the Earth. As the moon orbits the Earth, the distance between the two bodies varies by about 50,000 kilometers. At apogee, the moon is furthest from the Earth. At perigee, the moon is closest to the Earth. And I decided that this would be magically significant. Both the blood moon, which has this wonderful connotation of werewolves, lycanthropy, which is associated with the full moon, and the idea that the magical potency of the moon is at its greatest when it's closest to the Earth. The gameplay of Lunacy involves literally chasing the moon down through the years of this man's existence. As the years flash past, the player is called upon to notice when there's a blood moon, when there's a super blood moon, which is a little bit bigger on the calendar, to click in time and then to visit the appropriate location and hope that a cure will be forthcoming. Most of the time, it fails. My starting point for Lunacy was simply looking at calendars, not of the calendar year or the calendar month, but of moons and the cycles of the moon. The moon goes from new to half full to full and back again every 29 and 1/2 days. So it doesn't fit neatly into a month. During my research, I learned a lot about lunar eclipses. There are a number of different types of lunar eclipses. There's partial lunar eclipses, penumbral lunar eclipses when the moon is only partially inside the shadow of the Earth, not in the full, deepest shadow, the umbra, and of course total lunar eclipses, which I decided were the magically significant ones. I started to chart the total lunar eclipses over the past 200 years. When had they happened? How frequently do they happen? And it turns out that the time period between total lunar eclipses really varies because of this 29.5-day cycle and a couple of other factors as well. It might be 176 or 177 days from one total eclipse to the next. It might be 354 or 355 days. It might be 856 or 857 days. It might be 1,034 days or 1,035 days. That half day is coming into effect here. Or it might be 1,210 days. It really varied. And it was predictable, but it wasn't a pattern that lended itself really well to gameplay. One of my first ideas was that the player would be called upon, as these calendars flash past, to guess how many days it would be until the next total lunar eclipse. And I would give the player a series of numbers. The player would have to choose one. But really, it would come down pretty much to guesswork at that point, because the numbers just change up so often. And while I was able to see the pattern when I plotted all the lunar eclipses out on this great big chart that I made, it would be very difficult for the player to see that just through calendars flashing past. The reason for all this variety in terms of the number of days between total lunar eclipses has to do with a number of things. One, the period of the moon, the 29.5 days I mentioned beforehand. Two, because a full or a total lunar eclipse can only happen when there's a full moon. You have to have the sun, and then the earth, and then the moon all lined up for the moon to fall into Earth's shadow. The orbit of the moon, however, is slightly tilted by 5 degrees in relation to the plane of the sun and the earth. So the moon is doing this little dance, sometimes a little bit higher, sometimes a little bit lower, not always within that plane where the shadow falls, where the umbra, the deepest part of the shadow, falls. And this is all contributing to the pattern of varying amounts of time between total lunar eclipses. In any given year, there can be anywhere from no total eclipses of the moon at all to 3 total lunar eclipses. So this is reflected in the game. If you are able to click on the year that has lunar eclipses in it, and it's a year with 3 lunar eclipses, you'll see 3 choices of places you can go to on the Earth to try and get into the range of where you can see the moon, where you can see the eclipse. Each time there is a total lunar eclipse, it's never in the same place on the Earth twice. Whenever an eclipse happens, it shifts slightly in terms of the longitude by about 120 degrees. So you literally are chasing the eclipse around the world as you're trying to catch it and hoping for a clear sky, bask under the light of a blood moon. If I'd had more time with this game, I would have gone a lot deeper into the mechanics. I have a very rudimentary system for keeping track of the player's location. I do it by continent. One of my early ideas was to do it by city. That got crazy way too fast. And to also keep track of the player's next destination and establish how much money it would cost to get there. I simply do it in increments of 5 coins, 10 coins, 15 coins. The further you travel, the further the continent you're traveling to, the more the cost. The amount of coin you have does go down each time you travel. And if you travel too much, too far, it is possible to run out of money and reach a game over state where it's no longer possible to travel and no longer possible to find a cure. Given more time to work on this in a more complex game, I would have loved to have shown the player exactly how much each destination costs to go to, give the player a little bit more information about what the choice might be and how travel might impact their finances. As it is, it's kind of a brute force effect. Usually when most people are playing, they just go, oh, highest percentage, I'll go there. I also had thought about making the weather something that you didn't discover until you actually went to the site. Again, I ran out of time to do that. I had thoughts of making the weather tied to local weather in the location and the season, whether you're in the northern or southern hemisphere. It got way too complicated, way too fast for the limited amount of time I had to create this game. I also thought about adding NPCs. One of the games that I played several years ago and absolutely loved was a video game called 80 Days. It's based on the novel Around the World in 80 Days. And in that game, you're following different paths around the world, trying to circumnavigate the world, clicking on different cities you can go to and different paths open up. And that game has a really robust economic simulation to it, in that you're buying and selling souvenirs to fund your journey. And sometimes you get stuck in a particular location, you have to send away for a bank draft and you have to wait, and it's a race around the world. I had thought about doing a similar economic system, but again, that's a much larger game. Also in 80 Days, there are NPCs who you can meet along the way. And I had thought of playing around with NPCs you could meet, and if you met them and were talking to them and the cure didn't work, it would be the full moon. A blood moon, but a full moon. And if you're not cured, bad things would happen to these NPCs, and you'd feel more and more guilty as the game went along and you started killing and devouring people, these people you had met. One of the early iterations of this game included the ability to choose slow, medium, or fast speed for the years to scroll by. Slow proved ridiculously easy to be able to click on a year with the moon in it. Medium was okay, but I chose to just default to fast for the final game. Yes, the years flash past really quickly, and it can sometimes be hard to hit that stop button and land on a year with a total lunar eclipse, but I like that effect for two reasons. One, the years are whipping past, and this sort of simulates this person who's immortal and to whom a year is a blink of an eye at this point. And two, it gives a sense of urgency that I wanted. You're literally chasing, these full moons, trying to click on a blood moon year, and hoping like heck you get it right. Otherwise, the years are flashing past. The other thing I needed to do was to decide a start and stopping point. This project ballooned really fast because I decided to go 200 years from current day, 200 years back from current day, and look at all the total lunar eclipses. So I would have enough data to generate the time frequency between lunar eclipses. Anyways, it got really crazy. And in the end, I decided I needed a magical start and stop point. And those years turned out to be 1834 and 2010. The reason? The blood moon in those years, the total lunar eclipse, fell on the solstice, which I decided was also magical. And so I made those my start and stop points for the story. Took me a lot of work to pull everything together. I wound up with 175 years worth of data being included in the game, and 100 different eclipses being included in the game. If I was doing it all over again, I would very much abstract the system. I wouldn't necessarily go as slavishly as I did with the actual years and the actual eclipses and the actual locations. I would just abstract all of that and give a sense of the lunar eclipses rather than sticking precisely to the dates and locations. But the starting point for It's a Date was calendars. So that was my starting point, and this is where the journey led me. I hope you enjoy my game. It's available on itch.io.